When Casablanca was released in 1942, it quickly became one of the most iconic films of the 20th century. Directed by Michael Curtiz and produced by Warner Brothers, the film tells the story of Rick Blaine, an American expatriate who runs a nightclub in the Moroccan city of Casablanca during World War II. Beneath its romance and memorable dialogue, however, Casablanca carried a powerful political message. That message is precisely why the film was banned in Nazi Germany. The ban was not simply about entertainment. It reflected the larger struggle over ideology, propaganda, and control during one of the most intense periods of global conflict. To understand why Casablanca was banned, it is important to understand the role of cinema in Nazi Germany. Film was not treated as harmless amusement. Under the direction of Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda tightly controlled every aspect of cultural life. Movies were carefully screened to ensure that they supported Nazi ideology, strengthened morale, and reinforced loyalty to Adolf Hitler and the German state. Foreign films were particularly scrutinized, especially those coming from Hollywood, which the Nazis saw as both culturally influential and politically hostile. Any film that portrayed Germany negatively, sympathized with its enemies, or promoted democratic ideals was considered dangerous. Casablanca did all three. At its core, the film tells the story of people trying to escape Nazi-occupied Europe. The character Victor Laszlo is a resistance leader who has survived a concentration camp and continues to fight against the Nazi regime. He is portrayed as intelligent, brave, and morally upright. In contrast, the German officers in the film are authoritarian and menacing. Major Strasser, the principal Nazi figure, is depicted as manipulative and ruthless. This clear moral contrast would have been intolerable to Nazi authorities. The regime worked tirelessly to present itself as powerful, orderly, and justified in its actions. A film that framed German officials as villains and resistance fighters as heroes directly undermined that narrative. One of the most famous scenes in Casablanca illustrates this conflict vividly. In Rick's cafe, a group of German soldiers begin singing a patriotic German song. In response, Victor Laszlo leads the band in playing La Marseillaise, the French national anthem. The refugees and patrons rise together and sing with emotion, drowning out the German voices. The scene symbolizes unity, defiance, and resistance against oppression. For audiences in Allied countries, it was stirring and inspirational. For the Nazi regime, however, such a scene would have been viewed as subversive. It dramatized the idea that ordinary people could stand up to German authority and win, even if only symbolically. The emotional power of that moment made the film particularly threatening from a propaganda standpoint. Another reason for the ban lies in the film's sympathetic portrayal of refugees. Throughout Casablanca, the audience sees men and women desperate for exit visas, clinging to the hope of escape to America. They are not portrayed as criminals or cowards, but as victims of political persecution and war. This humanization directly contradicted Nazi propaganda, which often dehumanized refugees, especially Jewish refugees, portraying them as inferior or harmful. By inviting viewers to empathize with displaced people, the film challenged the ideological foundations of Nazi racial policies. In a regime built on exclusion and persecution, empathy itself could be seen as dangerous. The background of the filmmakers also contributed to the film's unacceptability in Germany. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s became a refuge for many European artists fleeing fascism. Several of the writers and contributors to Casablanca were Jewish or outspoken critics of Nazism. The Epstein brothers, who co-wrote the screenplay, were Jewish Americans. The Nazis had already purged Jewish artists from German cultural life, banning their work and labeling it degenerate. A film shaped by Jewish writers and produced by an American studio would have been ideologically unacceptable before anyone even considered its plot. The regime's censorship policies were not only about content, but also about who created that content. The timing of the film's release also mattered. Casablanca premiered in 1942, at a critical point in World War II. The United States had officially entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and American cinema increasingly reflected wartime themes. While Casablanca is not a conventional war film filled with battle scenes, it clearly supports the Allied cause. Rick Blaine's character arc reflects this shift. At the beginning of the film, Rick claims to stick his neck out for no one. By the end, he chooses to sacrifice his personal happiness for a larger moral cause, helping Victor Laszlo escape so he can continue fighting the Nazis. This transformation mirrors the broader American narrative of moving from isolation to active resistance against fascism. Such messaging would have been interpreted in Germany as outright enemy propaganda. Nazi authorities were deeply aware of film's emotional influence. Goebbels himself admired Hollywood's technical skill and storytelling power, even as he condemned its politics. The regime invested heavily in its own film industry, producing features that glorified German history, promoted anti-Semitic stereotypes, or encouraged loyalty to the state. Allowing Casablanca to be shown in German theaters would have introduced a competing narrative, one that suggested the Nazi regime was neither invincible nor morally justified. In a totalitarian system that depended on controlling information, even a romantic drama posed a risk if it carried the wrong message. It is also important to recognize that Casablanca presents a worldview grounded in democratic values. The film emphasizes individual choice, moral responsibility, and resistance to tyranny. Characters are defined not by race or nationality, but by their actions and principles. The idea that people of different backgrounds can unite against oppression runs throughout the story. This stands in direct opposition to Nazi ideology, which was built on racial hierarchy, authoritarian control, and unquestioning obedience. By celebrating diversity and moral courage, the film implicitly rejected the foundations of the Third Reich. The ban on Casablanca therefore fits into a broader pattern of censorship in Nazi Germany. Books were burned, newspapers were controlled, and artistic expression was limited to what served the state. The regime feared dissent not only in speeches or protests, but also in stories and images. A single powerful film could shape perceptions, stir emotions, and plant seeds of doubt. In a time of war, when maintaining morale and unity was crucial, the leadership could not risk exposing German audiences to a film that portrayed their government as the villain of the story. After World War II ended and the Nazi regime fell, Casablanca was eventually shown in Germany. In the post-war period, its themes of resistance and moral awakening took on new meaning. For modern viewers, the fact that the film was banned underscores how threatening art can be to authoritarian systems. What appears to be a classic love story is also a statement about courage, sacrifice, and standing up against injustice. In the end, Casablanca was banned in Germany because it challenged the ideological and political foundations of the Nazi regime. It portrayed Nazis as oppressors, resistance fighters as heroes, and refugees as deserving of compassion. It was created by individuals the regime sought to silence and released at a time when propaganda was a weapon of war. The ban serves as a reminder that film is never just entertainment. In moments of crisis, stories have power. They can reinforce authority or they can question it. For Nazi Germany, Casablanca did the latter, and that made it too dangerous to be seen.